when we examine the complex system involved in sustainable desired change, one of the things we notice, as I illustrate with this, is that the intentional change process of these 5 discoveries or epiphanies occurs similarly, you could even call them a fractal, at each level. So that's a way an individual changes, or a couple, boss subordinate, members of a mother, father, how teams change, organizations, communities, countries, or cultures, or whole global processes. They each go through these 5 stages of discovery to get to sustained desired change. In complex system theory, it says that if you have a system like this, it doesn't really function as a complex system unless something moves information across the levels. I would add that because we're talking about human systems, it should add information, transfer information, and emotion across the levels. So one of the things that seems to do that are resonant leaders. Now, resonant leaders are useful within a level. So within an organization, they help to create a sense of purposiveness, as we talked about in the first module, a sense of hope, purpose, compassion, caring, mindfulness, being attentive, and even playfulness. But they help to engage and activate the various sources of capital in an organization toward the objectives. But we're also saying that these resonant leaders do something more. And that more is to move, like I said, information and emotion across levels. And then the second characteristic that helps us to move across levels are what's called social identity groups. I'll explain those in a few minutes. But let's stay on the functioning of the resonant leaders across the levels. One of the things that can help us as we think about this is the importance of multiple levels in teams. So within a team level, you have multiple levels of leadership. In a sports team, you've got players on the team that function like an emotional glue. Certainly if we think about the national U.S. women's soccer team, Mia Hamm, Brandy Chastain, Julie Foldy, they provided an emotional glue in the team that I don't believe any one of them were actually formal team captains. Certainly I know that the 1986 Super Bowl winning Chicago Bears, Walter Payton and Mike Singletary, were the emotional glue on the team. They weren't the quarterback, but they helped keep things together. Various times in the Boston Celtics, you had people like John Havlicek or Larry Bird performing this emotional glue. But within a team, you not only need what I would call the resonant team captain, not the formal team captain, you also need a resonant coach, somebody who moves information between the team level and the players and then communicates with the level above him or her. Because you also need a third level of resonant leadership, which would be the resonant, if it's working well, general manager or owner. And I would contend that sports teams that win consistently or continue to improve every year consistently have all 3 levels of these resonant leaders in place. In education, we see the same thing, that we know from prior research, which I'll be reviewing in a future module, that when teachers act with more emotional intelligence, the students do better on outcome measures. Everything from standardized tests to completing and less truancy, etc. But teachers do better when the principals act with more emotional and social intelligence. And we have studies that show that the principals do better when the superintendents act toward them with more social and emotional intelligence. And we have these studies, by the way, in the US and Canada, in the UK, in Turkey, and in Algeria. So what we're saying is that most of the time, to get people in their system moving forward, moving toward a desired change, or maintaining the momentum and the work, we need to have multiple levels of resonant leaders, not just one resonant leader. As any classroom teacher knows, you can only maintain a degree of resonance with the students for so long if the person above you, department chair or assistant principal or headmaster or headmistress, is not acting in a resonant relationship with you. So we have these multiple levels that go on in every organization. It parallels the multiple levels here, except what I'm adding is that you really need these resonant relationships, these resonant leaders at multiple levels. Now, one of the ways you could explore this, and let's do this now as an exercise, is to look at the multiple levels in your life system. And to do that, I would like you to, when I suggest that you pause on the video, to write yourself onto a piece of paper as a circle. And you might have to make it a large enough circle to create enough room for what I'm going to talk about, and say me. And then attached to or overlapping on the circle, write a smaller circle for each of the dyads that are a part of your life system. So if you have a partner or a spouse, that's one dyad. If you have a boss, that's a dyad. If you have subordinates that you deal with individually, each one of those pairs is a dyad. If you have children, it's a dyad. If your parents are still alive, it's a dyad with each. And draw each of the dyads in your life system. And when you draw it, write in the person's name as to who the dyad is with. And then what I want you to do is reflect on whether or not you believe that relationship is relatively positive emotional attractor or negative emotional attractor in the emotional tone. And relatively, I mean most of the time. Another way to say it is the relationship between you and the other person on the whole resonant or on the whole dissonant? So if you put that label into each of the little circles, that would be useful. Once you do that, I want you to then do another set of circles overlapping the individual and some of the dyads that might have to do with teams. So if you have a spouse or partner and or children, now the family circle may be the equivalent of a team. If it's with your parents or siblings, there might be a circle of your family of origin. If it's with a group of subordinates at work, you might have a work circle. If it's with a board of advisors or directors, you might have another team circle there. There might be some other teams in which you're engaged in your life system, teams in terms of your own church, temple, or mosque communities, professional activities, leisure activities. And within each of those team circles, after you write which team it is, write in whether or not your experience in that on the whole at this stage is positive emotional attractor, PEA, or negative, NEA. And then to make things worse, being a professor, I'm supposed to make things very complicated. After you do the teams, I want you to write even a bigger circle on the outside of organizations. And at that point, you could also write some large circles of communities or communities of practice. So if you are involved in a church or temple or mosque as a social group, that becomes an organization or a community. If you're involved in a professional association, that becomes a community. If you're involved in your own agency, that's an organization. And again, within each of those, start to put a label as to whether or not, on the whole, your experience of interactions in that circle is predominantly positive, emotional attractor, or negative. So, I hope that isn't too complicated. And remember, if you don't do the exercise, you're not getting much value from these modules. So, I hope you'll do the exercise, and I'm going to suggest right now that you hit the pause button and start to create these reflections. Welcome back. As you start to envision the many levels and relationships in your life system, the overall should start to create some impression as to which parts of your life system right now are really helping you rejuvenate, go into renewal, enter more of the positive emotional attractor, and what parts of your life system right now are being more dissonant or more negative emotional attractor. The idea being that if you're trying to help yourself, you're going to see how you can move more of them from negative to positive emotional attractor, or more of them from dissonant to resonant, or if you can't, just know that you have to tolerate it. as we said before in the second module, if you have to live with a certain number of dissonant relationships in your life or negative emotional attractor parts of your life system, you had best oversample or over practice renewal activities. Otherwise, you're going to continue to close down and not just get burned up,